The sea was completely calm like a mirror. The stars were setting right down to the horizon. In fact, some of the passengers said that they could see the stars reflected on the surface of the water.
For over a century, the story of the Titanic has intrigued people worldwide. Following its catastrophic sinking in 1912, the enormous ship came to rest about 12,500 feet below the ocean surface, standing as a reminder of one of history's greatest maritime disasters. But what if there was a way to recover the Titanic from its underwater grave? Interestingly, scientists have put forward groundbreaking plans to retrieve the remains of the sunken vessel. Join us in this video as we delve into these revolutionary plans. Cryogenic freezing.
Titanic's lookouts are staring ahead at the calm ocean. And then they notice a dark object coming out of the haze in front of them.
Could ice, a factor in the Titanic's downfall, be the key to rescuing its wreckage? Daring plans have surfaced proposing to completely freeze and wrap the Titanic with liquid nitrogen, enabling its rescue as a single frozen block. However, this ambitious idea is confronted with significant technical challenges. At first sight, the premise seems simple. The goal is to enclose the wreck in a metal net to safeguard its fragile structure while it freezes. The surrounding water would quickly freeze as liquid nitrogen was pushed down into the depths, turning the Titanic into a huge ice block that could float to the surface undamaged. However, putting this concept into practice is extremely difficult. It's astounding how big of an operation this is. Enclosing a 46,000-ton vessel and freezing a space larger than 1,000 feet requires enormous amounts of liquid nitrogen. There are other challenges involved in building a protective metal enclosure around the wreck, including environmental issues and the engineering know-how needed to securely hold such a massive and delicate item. It's an ambitious project that has never been done before. The first challenge is moving such large amounts of liquid nitrogen 12,500 feet below the surface. To get enough of the icy liquid to the surface would require hundreds of insulated tanker trucks. Massive cryogenic pumps and long, specialized pipelines are necessary for regulated distribution and delivery around the Titanic's final resting location. It is an enormous undertaking to set up this kind of massive freezing infrastructure on the seabed alone. Once at the location, the deep water poses more challenges. Because of the extremely high pressure and close to freezing temperatures, the liquid nitrogen must remain liquid during the fall in order to efficiently absorb heat and cause freezing. When discharge pressures exceed 2,500 psi, specialized nozzles, valves, and flow controls are essential to preventing fast gasification. The inherent insulating qualities of the ocean make matters more difficult because seawater has a high thermal mass and conductivity, which means that significant cooling power is needed to overcome its propensity to absorb heat. Furthermore, the uniform dispersion of freezing around the wreck may be hindered by frozen materials on the seafloor. It is essential to continuously monitor and modify the injection process across the vast and shadowy depths. Although it is theoretically possible, providing refrigeration this intense over 3 miles below the surface of the water presents enormous logistical and technological hurdles comparable in size to those faced by the Titanic. As a result, although the idea of raising the famous liner inside a single block of ice sparks curiosity, accomplishing this audacious task is still purely theoretical. Submersible cranes. A groundbreaking engineering project seeks to retrieve the Titanic by use of an underwater crane, a cutting-edge technological advancement. These next-generation deep-sea giants are not like traditional marine cranes. They are made expressly to lift the massive Titanic wreck from its deep-sea resting place. Crane designs that operate at depths where pressures surpass 5,500 pounds per square inch are extremely demanding, requiring the application of cutting-edge machinery and material science. These cranes have to be able to endure the extreme circumstances found in the abyssal zone in every way, from their sturdy lattice arms to their powerful electric motors, hydraulic systems, and precise control mechanisms. These cranes, which use advanced alloys resistant to corrosion and fatigue in temperatures close to freezing, are equipped with electro-hydraulic systems for precise mobility and draw experience from the fields of aerospace engineering, underwater robotics, and offshore oil drilling. But they can do more than just survive in extremely deep waters. They are designed to lift things that weigh more than 46,000 tons, or more than 5,000 African elephants. In fact, some designs call for lifting capacities as high as 30,000 tons, which is about the same as the weight of an aircraft carrier of the Nimitz class. A major advancement in engineering skills is demonstrated by the incorporation of a deep-sea crane with such enormous lifting capacity. However, considering the Titanic's delicate condition after 110 years at sea, the effort of raising it requires more than just physical strength. Once sturdy, the steel structure of the ship now rests in two sections amidships, rusted and partly submerged in dirt. Its hull plates are weakened and its decks have collapsed. Because of this, the underwater cranes must be incredibly powerful and also function at a tiny degree of sensitivity and precision. It will be crucial to carefully position the attachment locations on the wreck. An excessive number of connections runs the risk of causing unequal stresses to twist or pull the vessel apart, and careless placement could further damage any remaining bulkheads and hull fragments. To avoid aggravating already existing damage, the cranes must balance force and gentleness in their grasp. They need to be able to precisely alter their movements and lifting rates in real time, guided by sensor feedback, exactly like a highly competent surgeon would. Although these submersible cranes have the immense strength to potentially move the Titanic, the practicality of this enormous undertaking would depend on how well they can be controlled. Their combination of exact operational finesse and ocean engineering prowess holds the potential to safely raise the historic Titanic from its deep-sea burial place permanently. Lifting with magnets. Consider using magnetism itself to lift the Titanic wreck from the depths of the sea. It is possible to use magnetic force to lift portions of the decaying liner by attaching strong electromagnets to the iron parts of the Titanic's hull. This cutting-edge strategy provides a contactless way to recover sunken ship pieces. But there are major obstacles in the way of its actual deployment, particularly at deep ocean depths, which make it less feasible. The idea is to attach and raise iron and steel components of the wreck, like structural frames and hull plates, using massive salvage electromagnets. When energized, these electromagnets produce powerful magnetic fields that can move large wreckage pieces despite their enormous weight. The first challenge, though, is to create magnets strong enough to raise sections of a shipwreck weighing several tons from thousands of feet below the surface. Underwater circumstances are particularly hostile, requiring magnets with exceptionally high field strengths and large power requirements due to the tremendous pressures and corroded surfaces. Furthermore, these magnets' electrical systems need to be strong enough to sustain the strain of lifting operations at maximum capacity without failing. The electromagnets also need to provide accurate control over the attachment and release procedures. Gripping Titanic pieces carelessly runs the risk of breaking delicate remains or tangles in the debris field. In order to guarantee delicate detachment and reattachment actions, even in the difficult conditions of deep-sea darkness and severe pressure, sophisticated magnet control systems are required. There are special risks associated with lifting ships such as the Titanic. The structural integrity of the Titanic is seriously degraded after 100 years on the bottom. By accident, applying magnetic lifting forces may cause corrosion to worsen, weak spots to fracture, rivets to come loose, or even sections of the hull to collapse. Broken cables or tangled electromagnets could result from the unexpected movement or collapse of material during lifting. The deeper the procedure, the higher the hazards. It's an exciting notion to surgically lift Titanic wreckage parts using precise magnetic force. Nevertheless, there are considerable obstacles in the way of creating electromagnets that are precise and strong enough to securely extract massive, decaying chunks of shipwreck from extremely deep waters. Therefore, there are still many obstacles in the way of this futuristic salvaging method's actualization. Buoyancy tanks. One daring plan to complete this enormous undertaking calls for the deployment of buoyancy tanks. Theoretically, the Titanic may be lifted off the ocean floor by attaching these massive air-filled containers to the ship's hull. Though conceptually straightforward, there are several real-world obstacles. The first obstacle is the sheer enormity of the Titanic. At 882 feet in length and more than 46,000 tons in weight, it was the biggest movable building at the time. Such a massive bulk must be lifted from depths greater than 2 miles, which is an unprecedented engineering task. Extreme pressures, estimated to be above 5,500 pounds per square inch, more than twice the pressure of a typical vehicle tire, must be tolerated by specialized buoyancy tanks. These tanks, which are made of incredibly durable materials, would go through extensive testing to make sure they can withstand the severe circumstances at the disaster site. To keep these tanks from collapsing under the weight of the ocean, even the air that is pumped into them needs to be compressed to extremely high pressures. One major challenge is ensuring that buoyancy is distributed evenly throughout the Titanic crash site. The ship lies on the ocean below around 2,000 feet apart, having broken into two parts prior to sinking. The location and number of buoyancy tanks needed to raise both portions at the same time must be planned precisely in order to reduce the possibility of further injuring the already delicate wreck. Modern technology is needed to deploy these tanks and firmly fasten them to the wreckage. Each tank is positioned by remotely operated underwater vehicles, ROVs, and the technical diver's job is to bolt the tanks onto the Titanic's hull. Careful observation of every stage of the process is necessary to avoid any disconnections that can cause the lift to become unstable. Furthermore, filling these tanks with compressed air requires enormous logistical work. Strong infrastructure is required to move thousands of tons of water, and this includes sizable surface support boats that are outfitted with compressed air delivery systems and vast pipeline networks. Operationally, this complicated system becomes even more complex to manage from more than 12,500 feet above the ocean surface. It would take an unprecedented level of technological coordination, engineering know-how, and careful preparation to successfully navigate these obstacles, highlighting the sheer magnitude of the endeavor to possibly raise the Titanic to the surface after spending more than a century below the surface. Controlled explosion. A novel method of recovering the Titanic wreck has been suggested by some researchers: dynamite-controlled blasts. The idea behind this technique, which may appear severe and even destructive at first, is to carefully disassemble the wreck into smaller, easier-to-lift pieces while maintaining the historic integrity of the entire structure. But detonating well-timed bursts on a collapsing shipwreck kilometers below the surface presents a great deal of uncertainty and difficulty. The idea is to strategically place explosive charges on and around the wreckage of the Titanic. These charges may be set off in a precisely timed manner that would shatter the Titanic into smaller pieces scattered over the debris area. The salvage operation might then become more possible because these smaller portions would be simpler to lift, either singly or in groups. It is important to remember that traditional high explosives, such as TNT or RDX, are too destructive to be used for this purpose. Rather, precise engineering would be required to create specialized shaped charges. The explosive energy of these charges would be precisely focused, with the goal of shattering strong steel plates without causing undue damage to the surrounding building. To avoid unintentional harm, careful planning and rigorous modeling would be needed for the placement and sequencing of these charges. Any errors in judgment or flaws in the crash could cause disastrous structural collapses due to explosions that are positioned incorrectly. The unpredictable nature of underwater blast propagation presents significant hurdles for the plan's implementation, which calls for using controlled explosives to fragment the Titanic wreck for salvaging. In water, shockwaves exhibit distinct characteristics, reflecting and echoing in ways that heighten the possibility of inadvertent harm. Performing these kinds of activities at deep ocean depths makes these difficulties tenfold more severe. Accurately deploying charges throughout an extensive underwater debris field necessitates exceptional proficiency and state-of-the-art equipment that pushes existing capabilities to their limits. Although very difficult, real-time detonation monitoring necessitates the ability to quickly stop the sequence in case of unforeseen problems. In theory, the idea of systematically dismantling the Titanic into smaller, salvageable pieces through controlled explosives sounds reasonable, but in practice, there are a lot of risks involved. Hydraulic lift system. Some scientists are intrigued by the idea of retrieving the 46,000-ton Titanic wreck using hydraulic systems similar to those used in heavy industry. The plan is to bury a number of huge hydraulic jacks firmly fixed to the ocean floor beneath the Titanic's exterior. The lifting forces would be uniformly distributed across the underside of the wreck by fixed steel plates. The Titanic would be progressively raised to the appearance of an underwater platform, thanks to the coordinated extensions of the jack's piston arms powered by high-pressure hydraulic fluid that was supplied from surface vessels through reinforced hoses. The main difficulty, though, is designing hydraulic jacks that can lift such a large weight at high-depth pressures. An 850-foot ocean liner that has lain on the seafloor for a century must be lifted by lifting forces strong enough to overcome inertial and frictional resistance. This is what these jacks must produce. Because of this, hydraulic cylinders with previously unheard of pressure capabilities and load ratings are required. The success of the operation depends on the hydraulic jacks being placed strategically. If there are too few connection points, loads may be concentrated and the hull may get damaged. If the wreck is completely surrounded by a hydraulic network, lifting forces may differ. To minimize the danger of structural failure during the lifting process and to select the best location for the jacks, thorough structural analysis and simulations are essential. Coordinating many massive hydraulic jacks simultaneously at a depth of miles on the dark ocean floor is an incredible task that almost seems unfeasible. There is no room for error in this intricate procedure, which calls for perfect synchronization between the jacks to avoid structural failures or distortions during the Titanic's rise. Reaching perfect balance between pressure, flow rates, and speed is like seeing a perfectly orchestrated ballet, albeit one that is carried out by machines that can generate enormous amounts of force. Though there is theoretical engineering potential in the idea of lifting the Titanic with a precisely timed array of hydraulic jacks, there are significant practical obstacles. This approach can only be considered theoretical because of its enormous power requirements, exact control demands, and calibration issues at such great ocean depths. Given the risks involved in installing many complexly controlled heavy-lift hydraulic systems in the harsh Atlantic Ocean, it's possible that the famous liner will always lie on the ocean floor. Underwater balloons. Imagine raising the Titanic with a group of massive, robust balloons instead of strong tanks. Proposals to raise the infamous wreck using lift bags or underwater balloons are based on this idea. The mechanics of releasing enough balloons to hoist a 46,000-ton ship create severe coordination issues, despite the balloon's greater flexibility than hard tanks. These inflated containers, often called airlifting bags, are made especially to be buoyant underwater. They are frequently used to raise huge objects, missing cargo, and sinking ships to the surface. The idea is simple. The bags are strategically fastened to the submerged object after being first deflated. After that, air is forced from above into the bags. Their buoyancy rises with inflation, applying lift force to the object and finally pushing it toward the surface. Using this technique to raise the enormous Titanic involves special difficulties. First of all, the lift bags are under tremendous pressure because the wreck is 12,500 feet below the surface. To resist these conditions, they need to be made of materials that are incredibly flexible and robust. Materials like carbon fiber reinforced synthetics or Kevlar are viable options. Each of the thousands of pounds of bags, which resemble big pillows, needs to have strong connection straps and remote operated valves for air infusion after deployment. There are enormous logistical hurdles in deploying hundreds or even thousands of these inflatable bags to create enough buoyancy to lift the colossal Titanic hull. The deflated bags would probably need to be transported by several support vessels outfitted with remotely controlled underwater vehicles and deep-sea cranes to the 12,500-foot deep wreck site. Accurate navigation and sophisticated robotic equipment would be needed to place each bag precisely and secure it to the wreckage. It becomes essential to carefully monitor the sequence of bag inflation after they are attached. Uneven inflation has the ability to destabilize the accident, leading to structural damage or twisting as a result of unequal pressures and forces. A complex control system would be necessary for accurate airfill rate and sequence adjustments for each bag, as well as real-time monitoring. The tight balance between technology, engineering precision, and operational safety needed to remove the Titanic using this novel approach is highlighted by the management of such a complicated operation at great ocean depths. Mass displacement. Imagine that instead of physically raising the Titanic, you could make it lighter so that it could float once more. Proposals to inject expanding foam into the decaying remnants of the historic liner are based on this creative notion. Theoretically, the Titanic may be made sufficiently buoyant to rise from its resting spot on the ocean floor by packing the hull and compartments with buoyant foam. This idea has a simple principle. Foams made of polyurethane and isocyanurate have inert cellular spaces that cause them to be less dense than water. These foams displace water and lower the ship's overall density when they are pumped into the wreck. This decreased density may produce enough upward force in accordance with Archimedes' concept of buoyancy to raise the 46,000-ton Titanic. But applying this method to the real wreck presents a lot of difficulties. First off, there is a significant logistical challenge in moving the massive amounts of expanding foam material to the deep-sea location. It would be necessary to combine and pump the foam components using strong, heavy-duty tubes that could resist high pressures at low depths. there are risks and complications involved in setting up and deploying this vast foam injection network on the seafloor. The next major problem is to distribute foam uniformly throughout the interior of the Titanic wreck after the complex injection system has been fitted. The goal is to fill empty spaces without endangering the ship's structural stability. Navigating the Titanic's intricate inner layout, which includes collapsed tunnels and compartments, adds more intricacy though. Foam injection point location would be guided by interior film and sonar readings. Century-old bulkheads could be harmed by excessive pressure buildups. Therefore, the injection procedure must be carefully supervised and regulated. The Titanic may be lifted off the bottom when the growing foam gradually increases in buoyancy as it seeps into the ruin. It is essential to regulate this lift in order to reduce abrupt movements or structural strains. To guarantee a smooth ascent, crews would closely monitor foam amounts, injection rates, and make necessary modifications. Sectional dismantling. Picture a large submerged operating room furnished with robotic saws and scalpels that are precisely controlled. The decaying RMS Titanic wreck is its patient. The aim was to carefully disassemble the iconic ocean liner into smaller parts that could be raised separately to the surface. But the difficult task of making accurate incisions at great depths pushes this salvaging idea to its limits. The basic concept is to use sophisticated cutting instruments to split the Titanic into smaller pieces so that each can be recovered separately. In theory, this method changes the challenge from moving one large wreck to lifting multiple smaller ones. However, maintaining surgical precision during the cutting process is crucial to its effectiveness. The location, deep in the sea and secluded, is the first obstacle. Due to communication delays, all cutting operations must be performed remotely by tethered robots or autonomous underwater vehicles, which restricts real-time control and responsiveness. Operating in complete darkness and depending only on external lighting and cameras for guidance further complicates matters. Another major problem is choosing the right cutting tools. These instruments need to be able to cut through strong steel with ease and be flexible enough to fit into tight spaces without compromising structural integrity. It would probably be necessary to use an extensive array of specialized cutting devices such as hydraulic shears, diamond wire saws, plasma torches, abrasive cutters, and more, each selected for its unique set of advantages and disadvantages. Creating cutting patterns that section the ship without sacrificing overall stability or triggering structural collapse is arguably the biggest problem. Analyses of the structure that are as thorough as forensic investigations are necessary, taking into consideration any deterioration and debris that can compromise safe lifting locations and the process of section separation. A lesson from the 1996 attempt to lift a portion of the Titanic's hull is in order. A salvage business used a submersible vessel to affix balloons filled with diesel to a 21-ton component that had a door and 4 portholes. As part of a bigger initiative to progressively save the Titanic over a number of years, the goal was to raise it to the surface for museum display. The chunk fell back to the ocean below when the cable supporting it snapped, bringing the operation to a disastrous halt. This $1.5 million loss highlighted the enormous risks and difficulty associated with such large-scale salvage efforts. The cable lifting. Using cables and cranes is one of the most basic ideas among the methods suggested to bring the Titanic out of its watery grave. This plan called for the Titanic to be lifted using strong cranes positioned on surface ships. The cranes would tie cables to the wreck and slowly raise the ship. Though straightforward in theory, there are significant practical difficulties with this strategy. Strong and long-lasting cables are needed to raise the Titanic, which weighs more than 46,000 tons, from a depth of more than 12,500 feet. The strongest synthetic materials on the market, like ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, would have to be used to create these cables. They would also need to be designed to survive corrosion and the enormous forces involved in lifting thousands of pounds under intense pressure. The cranes themselves, installed atop specialist heavy lift vessels built for such enormous jobs, would rank among the biggest marine salvage cranes ever. However, the safety of even the strongest cables and largest cranes depends on how firmly they are fastened to the wreck. With the Titanic broken into 2 main portions and quickly degrading, this is a daunting challenge. Multiple lifting points would need to be attached to the bow and stern pieces, which would require the employment of sophisticated underwater robots and expert divers. In order to reduce the potential of structural breakdown during the lifting process, these attachment points must be carefully positioned to disperse lifting forces among the wreck's most structurally sound parts. The accurate synchronization of the lift action is another crucial component. To guarantee that the Titanic is raised uniformly, the cranes must elevate the cables at precisely synchronized speeds. Because of the enormous stress loads involved, even small differences in lift speeds across the cables have the potential to destabilize or destroy the wreck. It takes careful real-time monitoring and ongoing adjustments to achieve and maintain this symmetrical lift from several connection sites on a century-old wreck immersed in the ocean. Essentially, although the idea behind the cable lifting method seems simple, executing it at such deep depths and with an object as massive and delicate as the Titanic poses a formidable array of logistical, engineering, and operational challenges that need to be carefully negotiated to guarantee the safety and success of the salvage operation. You'd probably agree that these plans are quite innovative, ranging from cryogenic freezing to cable lifting. Now, we eagerly await their implementation. Scientists are known for their relentless pursuit of new ideas and will be sure to update you if any new proposals arise.